An 18-year-old kid stood in his father's kitchen and said 5 words that would destroy his family forever. "I want to farm, Dad." His father's face went from normal to red to purple in about 3 seconds flat. "You're not going to college? After everything I've done? After all the money I've saved?" But here's the thing nobody saw coming. This wasn't just a fight about college. This was the beginning of the most insane revenge story you've ever heard. And it all started with $5,000 and a death wish. July 23rd, 1962. David's father had his entire life mapped out like a military operation. University of Iowa, business degree. Come home, take over the family hardware store. David's older brother had already done it, like a good little soldier. Now it was David's turn to fall in line. Except David looked his father dead in the eye and said, "I want to work land." His father laughed. Cold, mean, the kind of laugh that cuts. "You don't know anything about farming. You've never worked a day of real labor in your life." David didn't flinch. "Then I'll learn." His father's expression changed. "With what? You have no land, no equipment, no money except what your grandmother left you. That $5,000 was supposed to be for college." And here's where it gets wild. David said the words that would change everything. "It's my money. Grandma left it to me. I can use it how I want." His father went nuclear. "If you don't go to college, you're not my son. You're throwing away your future, throwing away everything I built for you." David stood his ground. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing a different path." And that's when his father said the words that would haunt him for the next 32 years. "Then choose it somewhere else. You're 18 now, legal adult. If you're going to be stupid on your own. Get out of my house." David's mother tried to stop it. His father shut her down instantly. "Stay out of this." David stood there stunned, thinking his father was bluffing. "You mean that? You want me to leave?" His father didn't hesitate. "I mean it. Pack your things. Be gone by tonight." But what nobody knew, not his father, not his mother, not anyone, was that David's grandmother had left him that $5,000 for exactly this reason. She'd known. She'd listened when David talked about farming. She'd understood him in a way his father never would. And 6 months after her death, her final gift was about to either save his life or destroy it completely. By 6 p.m. that evening, David was gone. 18 years old. $5,000 in savings. Nowhere to go. But he wasn't scared. He was laser-focused. He drove his beat-up 58 Ford pickup straight to the town library and started looking through property listings like a man possessed. And then he found it. The listing that would change everything. Abandoned farm for sale. 120 acres. House and barn. Owner deceased. Estate liquidation. Asking price, $7,500. David called the number immediately. The lawyer on the other end sounded tired. "The Anderson place. It's been empty for 10 years. Old man died in 52. Family couldn't agree on what to do with it. Finally decided to sell." Then the lawyer said something that made David's heart race. "But I'll be honest. It's rough. House is falling apart. Barn's not much better. Land hasn't been farmed in a decade. I'd take $5,000 just to be rid of it." David didn't sleep that night. Next morning, he met the lawyer at the property. 3 miles outside town, end of a dirt road, and what he saw should have made him run screaming in the opposite direction. The house was a disaster movie. Roof sagging like a hammock, windows broken, front porch collapsed, paint peeled to bare wood. It looked like a strong wind would flatten it. The barn was worse. Half the roof missing, walls leaning at angles that defied physics. Completely unusable. But then David walked the land. 120 acres of good Iowa soil, flat, fertile, just buried under a decade of weeds and brush. Underneath all that chaos was something solid, something real. David looked at the lawyer and said, "I'll take it. $5,000 cash." The lawyer actually looked concerned. "You sure? You're what, 19? This place needs $50,000 in repairs just to be livable." David didn't blink. "I'll figure it out." They closed the deal August 1st, 1962. David handed over every single penny his grandmother had left him. Now he owned 120 acres of overgrown wilderness, a house that should have been condemned, and a barn that was basically kindling waiting for a match. And then it gets absolutely insane. David moved in anyway, cleared enough space in the disaster house to set up a cot. No electricity. Power had been disconnected years ago. No running water. The well pump was completely shot. No heat except a barely functional wood stove. It was August in Iowa, brutally hot, so he didn't need heat yet. But winter was coming, and David was broke. Completely, totally broke. Every penny gone. He owned land he couldn't do anything with. So he got a job at the grain elevator in town, loading trucks, heavy labor, $8 per day, 6 days a week, $48 weekly. And here's the part that sounds impossible. David lived on almost nothing. 8 beans and rice. No electricity meant no refrigerator. 8 canned food. Drank water he carried in jugs from a neighbor's hose. And he saved every single penny. After 2 months, he'd saved $384. Went to an auction and bought a used plow for $75. But here's the twist that'll blow your mind. It was a horse-drawn plow from the 1930s. David couldn't afford a tractor, so he found a farmer willing to rent him a team of old Belgian draft horses for $10 per week. From September through November, this 18-year-old kid plowed 40 acres by hand. Well, by horse. Walking behind that ancient plow for 8 hours after already working 8 hours at the elevator. He came home every night exhausted, blistered, hands bleeding, but those 40 acres got plowed. Then winter hit like a freight train. David nearly froze to death. The house had gaps in the walls you could see through. Wind came straight through. Temperature inside was maybe 10 degrees warmer than outside. Not enough. He spent December and January patching holes with scrap wood, covering windows with plastic sheeting, getting that wood stove to work better. He survived, but barely. The townspeople thought he'd lost his mind. This young kid living in a condemned house with no electricity or water, trying to farm with horses in 1962. Not 1862. They whispered at the diner. They pointed when he walked past. Some felt sorry for him. Most were just waiting for him to fail so they could say they knew it all along. But you want to know the worst part? David's father heard about it. Everyone in town made sure he heard about it. They'd walk into the hardware store and say things like, "Saw your boy out there with those horses. Tough situation." His father would just grunt and change the subject. Then, one day in December, his father did something nobody expected. He drove out to the farm. Didn't announce it. Just showed up. David was outside splitting wood for the stove, barely dressed for the cold because his good winter coat had worn through. He looked up and saw his father's truck coming down that dirt road. For one insane moment, David thought maybe, just maybe, his father was coming to apologize, to help, to say he'd been wrong. David stood there, axe in hand, hope flooding through him like he hadn't felt in months. His father got out of the truck, looked at the collapsing house, looked at the disaster barn, looked at his son standing there in threadbare clothes, hands cracked and bleeding from the cold and the work. Their eyes met. David opened his mouth to speak. His father shook his head, didn't say a word, got back in his truck, drove away. That head shake, that single gesture, crushed David worse than getting kicked out had. Getting kicked out was anger. This was judgment. This was, "I was right about you." This was, "You're exactly the failure I predicted." David stood there watching those taillights disappear, and something inside him turned to stone. His father would never come back, and David would never stop proving him wrong. But spring 1963 changed everything. David had saved $800 working at the elevator all winter. He bought seed corn, $30 per acre for 40 acres. Total cost, $200. He didn't have enough. So he walked into the bank and borrowed $400 on a handshake. Then he planted by hand, walking the rows, dropping seeds, covering them. 40 acres took 3 weeks, working every evening and weekend. The corn grew. David walked those fields every single day looking for problems. Hand-pulled every weed because he couldn't afford herbicides. Summer was brutal. Working the elevator during heat waves, coming home to a house with no cooling, walking the fields, maintaining crops. He barely slept. September came. Harvest time. This was it. The moment that would prove whether David was a visionary or just a stubborn fool with a death wish. He borrowed a neighbor's combine for a week. Cost him $150, which was almost all his remaining savings. If this harvest failed, he was done. Game over. He'd have to crawl back to town, get a regular job, admit his father was right. David cut all 40 acres. And then came the moment that changed everything. The yield came in at 78 bushels per acre. Total harvest, 3,120 bushels. Corn was selling for $1.12 per bushel. He did the math 3 times because he couldn't believe it. Gross income, $3,194. After seed costs, equipment rental, everything, David netted $1,140, his first profit. The first proof this insane gamble could actually work. He sat in that broken-down house that night and cried. Not from sadness. From relief so intense it physically hurt. He paid back the bank's $400 the very next morning. The banker, a guy named Harold who'd taken a huge risk on this kid, actually smiled when David walked in. Heard your harvest came in good. Word traveled fast in small towns. David counted out the $400 in cash. Thanks for believing in me when nobody else would. The banker shook his head. I didn't believe in you. I believed in that land. You just happened to be stubborn enough to work it. But he was smiling when he said it. David had $1,140 left. Saved every penny for next year. And that winter, his second winter on that farm, felt different. The house was still cold. He was still poor. But now he had proof. Now he had momentum. 1964 hit different. David planted 60 acres and made $2,800 profit. Used that money to buy a used 1948 Farmall M tractor for $800. The day that tractor arrived, neighbors actually stopped by to see it. These were the same neighbors who'd been whispering about him the year before. Now they were asking for farming advice. The switch was instant and it was wild. 1965, 80 acres planted, $4,100 profit. David started fixing the house properly. New roof, $2,000. Used lumber. Did all the work himself. When he finished that roof, he stood in the yard and looked up at it. Solid. Weatherproof. Real. 3 years earlier, he'd been sleeping under a roof that leaked in 6 places. 1966. Planted all 120 acres. Made $6,800 profit. Fixed the barn for $1,500 using mostly salvage materials. The barn that had been falling down in '62 was now functional enough to store equipment. By 1967, David was 23 years old, 5 years after getting kicked out. The abandoned farm he'd bought for his grandmother's $5,000 was fully operational. House livable, barn functional, all 120 acres producing. But here's what nobody in town understood. This wasn't about the money for David. This was about proving that choosing your own path, even when everyone says you're insane, even when your own father disowns you, can lead to something real. But the real transformation? That was just beginning. In 1968, David met Catherine at the library, the same library where he'd first found that farm listing. She was 21, studying education. They married in 1969. Catherine moved onto the farm and started teaching at the local school. Her income stabilized everything, let David invest more aggressively. 1970, their first child was born, a daughter. 1972, their son arrived. The farm kept exploding. By 1975, David owned the original 120 acres plus an adjoining 80, total 200 acres. By 1980, he owned 320 acres and built a new house. Modern, comfortable. Catherine deserved it after years in that fixed-up wreck. By 1990, they owned 500 acres, operation grossing over $200,000 annually. By 2000, they owned 640 acres, from a condemned house and $5,000 to over $1. $8 million in value, in 38 years. But here's the part that'll destroy you emotionally. David's father watched all of this happen, watched his son go from kicked-out failure to millionaire farmer. And he never, ever forgave him. Not once in 32 years. But it gets so much worse than you think. 1967. David was 23, farming successfully, making real money, living a real life. He went to his father's hardware store wanting to show him he'd made it. He walked in wearing clean clothes, standing tall, no longer the desperate kid who'd been thrown out. The store had 3 customers. His father was behind the counter. Their eyes met. David watched his father's face transform. For one split second, David saw something, maybe surprise, maybe pride, flicker across his father's expression. Then it hardened into something cold and terrible. His father walked to the door, locked it right in front of everyone, flipped the sign to closed, and pointed at David to leave. The customers stood there, awkward and confused. David tried anyway. "Dad, I just want to talk. 5 minutes, please." His father said nothing, didn't acknowledge the plea, didn't acknowledge the customers watching, just kept pointing at the door like David was a stranger, not his son. David left and cried in his truck for 20 minutes while his father stood inside that store, probably telling those customers some version of why his younger son was dead to him. 1974. 7 years later, David's daughter was 4 years old, bright, beautiful, full of life. David wanted his father to meet his granddaughter, just once. He drove to his parents' house, knocked. His mother answered and immediately started crying. "David, I've missed you so much. Oh my God, is this..." She was reaching for the little girl when his father appeared behind her like a storm cloud. "Don't talk to him. He made his choice." His mother's voice broke. "Harold, he's our son. That's our granddaughter. Your granddaughter." David watched his father look at the little girl, really look at her, for maybe 3 seconds. The child smiled at him. Pure, innocent, not understanding the weight of this moment. His father's response cut like a knife. "He stopped being our son 12 years ago. Whatever that is, it's not my granddaughter." Door slammed so hard the little girl started crying. David held her, walked back to his truck, and made a decision right there. He would never, ever subject his children to that rejection again. If his father wanted a relationship, his father would have to come to him. David was done begging. But then came the moment that broke everything beyond repair. 1982. David's mother died of cancer. The diagnosis was brutal. Stage 4 spread everywhere, nothing to be done. David found out from his brother. His father hadn't even told him she was sick. By the time David learned, she had maybe a week left. He drove to the hospital immediately, but his father had left instructions at the front desk. David wasn't allowed in the room. David sat in that hospital parking lot for 3 days, hoping for 5 minutes with his mother before she died. Never got them. She passed away at 3 a.m. on the 4th day. David didn't even get to say goodbye. The funeral was brutal. David attended anyway because this was his mother, and he'd loved her even if his father had kept them apart. His father ignored him completely during the service. Acted like David didn't exist. Sat in the front pew with David's brother and his family, leaving David to sit alone in the back like a stranger. At the cemetery, after everyone else had left, David approached his father one last time. They stood there beside his mother's fresh grave, and David tried again. "Dad, can we please talk? Mom would have wanted us to..." His father's explosion was terrifying. Don't you dare tell me what your mother would have wanted. You killed her. You broke her heart when you walked away and she never recovered. Every day for 20 years she cried over you. Every holiday ruined because you weren't there. You did that. You chose that. David's voice shook. I didn't break her heart. I chose a different life. That's all. I chose to farm instead of... You chose wrong. His father was screaming now, right there in the cemetery. You chose wrong and it killed her, and I will never, ever forgive you for what you did to this family. Now leave me alone and don't you ever, ever come back to another family event. You're not family. You haven't been family since 1962. That was the last time David tried. His father died in 1994, still bitter, still angry, still stubborn. 12 years of silence. They never reconciled. Never spoke again after that cemetery. 32 years total of refusing to forgive his own son for the crime of succeeding on his own terms. But here's the twist that'll leave you absolutely speechless. Remember that hardware store? The one David's father demanded he take over? The one worth destroying a family over? It started struggling in the late 80s. Big box stores moved into the area, Home Depot, Lowe's. The little family hardware store couldn't compete. David's father fought it, refused to adapt, refused to change, refused to admit the business model was dying. He'd rather watch it burn than admit he might have been wrong about anything. The store struggled for years. Sales declining, customers leaving. His father borrowing money to keep it afloat, just barely hanging on. In 1994, David's father died of a heart attack. Still angry, still bitter, still convinced David had destroyed the family. And here's the part that hurts. His last words to David's brother were about David. Don't tell him I'm dying. Don't let him come to the funeral. He's not my son. David found out his father had died from a phone call from his brother. He's gone. Heart attack. Funeral's Thursday. And he didn't want you there. David went anyway. Sat in the back. Left before the burial. Cried in his truck for an hour. Not for the father who'd rejected him, but for the relationship they'd never have. 4 years after his father's death, the hardware store finally closed in 1998. The business David's father had demanded he inherit, the path his father said was the only right path, the thing worth destroying a family over. It failed completely. The building sat empty for years, boarded up, forgotten. Exactly what his father had predicted would happen to David's farm. Except David's farm was worth over $2 million by then, and it was still growing. And then David did something absolutely legendary. Something that would have broken his father's heart if his father had still been alive to see it. In 2015, David bought the old hardware store building. Paid cash. The building that represented everything his father wanted, everything David rejected, everything that led to 32 years of silence. David now owned it. People in town went crazy. They expected David to tear it down, maybe build something else, maybe just let it rot as a symbol of his victory over his father's memory. The rumors flew. He's finally getting his revenge. He's going to put a farming monument where the hardware store used to be. This is David rubbing his success in his dead father's face. David heard the whispers. Someone finally asked him directly, "Isn't this revenge? Rubbing your success in your dead father's face?" David's response gave everyone in that town chills. "No, this is redemption. My father built something that failed. I'm turning it into something that serves the community. That's not revenge. That's healing." The building became an agricultural education center, helps young farmers learn, offers classes on farming, budgeting, equipment maintenance. Since 2015, it's helped over 300 young farmers get started. David's father wanted that building to be his legacy. David made it happen, just not the way his father imagined. Fast forward to 2010. David's son Michael is running the farm. It's modernized, efficient, worth $2.06 million. By 2020, They own 720 acres worth $3 to $8 million, from a $5,000 wreck to nearly a $4 million operation. 60 years, 3 generations, all because an 18-year-old kid refused to accept his father's plan. But wait, there's one more twist that'll wreck you. David's grandson came to him one day. Same age David was when he got kicked out. The grandson said, "Grandpa, I want to farm." David's response? "Does your dad pressure you?" The grandson shook his head. "No," he said, "it's my choice." David smiled. "Good. That's how it should be. If you choose farming, choose it because you love it, not because we expect it." 4th generation. On land David bought abandoned for $5,000 in 1962. But this generation chose freely. No pressure, no expectations, no threats, just opportunity. That's David's real legacy, not the farm, the freedom to choose. His father kicked him out for choosing his own path. David gave his children the freedom to choose theirs. That breaks the cycle. That's redemption. In 2022, David spoke at his grandson's high school graduation, the same high school David graduated from in 1962. 60 years later, he said, "60 years ago, I graduated from this school. My father had a plan for my life. I chose a different plan. He kicked me out, told me I was throwing my life away. I bought an abandoned farm for $5,000. Everyone said I'd fail. 60 years later, that farm is worth nearly $4 million, supports 3 families, will last generations. I didn't fail. I succeeded by refusing to let others define success for me. Choose your own path. Work hard. Never quit. Prove the doubters wrong. Not by talking, but by building something real." Standing ovation, 5 minutes. Students, parents, teachers, everyone. Because David's story resonates. Everyone faces doubt. Everyone faces rejection. Everyone faces people telling them they can't. David proved you can anyway. He's 79 now. Catherine is 76. They still live on the farm in the house they built in 1980. The farm grosses over $500,000 annually. Employs 4 people full-time. Supports 3 families. Contributes massively to the local economy. But David's greatest pride isn't financial. His father kicked him out for choosing his own path. David gave his children freedom. His father built a hardware store that failed. David built a farm that thrives generations later. His father died bitter and alone. David will die surrounded by family. Thrown out at 18, bought an abandoned farm for $5,000. Built it into a legacy worth millions. Changed everything. That's David. That's the farm. That's what happens when determination meets opportunity and refuses to quit, despite overwhelming doubt. Never let others define what's possible. Build your own path. Work decades to create something real. That's how you change everything. If this story inspired you, if you're facing someone telling you that you can't do something, if you're standing at your own crossroads wondering if you should take the safe path or the path that sets your soul on fire, hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me about your own abandoned farm, your own impossible dream, your own father who said you'd fail. Because David's story proves that the doubters are wrong. The safe path isn't always the right path. And sometimes the best revenge is building something so successful that it outlives everyone who said you'd fail. The farm still stands. The legacy continues. The lesson endures. Now go build your impossible dream.